Welcome to the Insights Unlocked podcast. I'm Nathan Isaacs, Senior Manager for Content Production at UserTesting. And joining us today as host is UserTesting CEO, Andy MacMillan. Welcome, Andy.
Hey, everyone.
And our guest today is Dave Kerry. Dave is UserTesting's Global Value Engineering Director. His background includes being a professional engineer and former management consultant with international experience across a number of industries. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Dave, thanks for coming on the podcast. You have a really interesting job here at UserTesting. You work with a lot of our customers, but most importantly, I think you have a topic that is a hot topic that you spend your time on in and around the kind of user experience and UX circles these days, which is essentially the idea of how do I create an ROI model or calculate the value of doing UX research. So can you explain a little bit about, number one, what your role is, and then a little bit about the importance of demonstrating the value of UX research and how you do that?
Yeah. It's a bit like the tree falling in the forest with no one around to hear it. You know, if we don't demonstrate the value of research, is the business going to listen to it? Is kind of the gap and kind of where my role comes in, because again, we see a gap between UX and research teams sometimes and their executives who want their business to be customer centric. They fundamentally understand the importance of talking to customers, but they don't fully grasp the impact of this work. And so my role, it really exists to help bridge that gap by qualifying and quantifying the business value of UX research in order to help those businesses take full advantage of the insights and the benefits that come from it, and hopefully help advance the field with these companies. I think we've seen over the past few years is what happens when we don't maybe do this effectively, and businesses sometimes don't know how to effectively leverage research insights as a strategic function and a competitive advantage. And as a result, we've seen in some cases, investments in these teams disproportionately affected by budget cuts and in some cases, unfortunately, layoffs.
Dave, how do you end up with a job doing value engineering and helping create ROI? Like, could you maybe share a little bit about your background with our audience? Because I do think this is a very hot topic, and I'm sure more than a few listeners will say, boy, the Dave guy sounds really helpful. Like, where does a Dave that does this kind of work come from? Like, how'd you get to this point?
Yeah, my career has been a bit of a circuitous route. I actually started in the oil industry, working on the back of oil rigs, did that all across Canada and in the Middle East for a little while. And really from that lens, started to understand, the business value of the decisions that were being made didn't always come down to the best engineering design. And so went away and did an MBA in finance and spent some time, as Nathan mentioned, in management consulting, where we really took this kind of analytical approach in order to help our customers. So really taking and breaking down their business to understand what the value drivers are, the levers that can impact that, and understanding where the opportunities for improvement are. And so this value engineering practice, as it exists in kind of SaaS software and B2B sales, really started with some of the big players in the industry. You think the Salesforce, the Workdays, the Oracles of the world, all have kind of these teams of Dave Kerrys that are working with their customers to better understand the impact technology is having on the business, the areas where it will impact them financially, and ultimately how they can potentially justify investment in these areas.
You've worked on a bunch of these for our customers over the last couple of years. What are the most compelling arguments you've seen our customers use to convince their stakeholders of the necessity and, frankly, I'd say the urgency of investing in UX research?
Yeah, I think as of this morning, we've worked with 344 now customers across the 19 or so verticals that we work in to assess the financial and the P&L impact of the work that they're doing. And in doing that, we've seen a few trends and I would say a few buckets where these impacts and these benefits normally lie, what we call our value drivers. And so there's really 4 areas that we see pretty frequently, and that's driving business growth, helping companies innovate faster, reducing operational costs, as well as mitigating risk. And so with each of these, we can typically assign a dollar value. And when you compare these more qualitatively to some of the strategic objectives for the companies that we're working with, they align pretty closely in one form or another. So all that to say, this work is really critical. We're just helping to really quantify the impact of it. When it comes to urgency, I think a lot of companies right now are focused on efficiencies and margins, maybe over strict growth. And for our clients who are doing this really effectively, they're managing their customer experience. They typically see about a 5 to 7 times return on their investment on these activities. And the folks that aren't, quite candidly, are being left behind.
So 5 to 7 times, like that's pretty strong ROI. I've been in leadership now for quite a few years. Not a lot of people bring you 500 to 700% returns on the investments you're making. So what are the things that you see people not doing that are the biggest opportunities? Like when you go into one of these, you said 344, you and your team go in and you sit down with a customer and they say, well, we're not doing this. Like, what's the thing? Oh, that's a big one. Like, you should definitely be doing that. Where do you look first?
I think it's really around how research and insights can influence product decisions from a roadmap kind of more strategically to more tactically in terms of the design decisions that are made. One example of a big opportunity that we came across, we work with a lot of the largest banks, I would say probably many of them at this point, and oftentimes they have business units that are dedicated towards their high net worth clients. So we had one business in particular that really wanted to focus on that experience, and particularly the digital experience for their high net worth clients, and decided to build an app really tailored to them. So intuitively, this sounds like a great idea, right? They've got kind of a subset of customers with specific challenges and needs, and they want to be able to better serve them. However, it turned out that high net worth clients really preferred kind of a more white glove, high touch approach. And so when they speak to somebody on the phone or they come into the branch, they really value and prefer that relationship with their account manager. And so after about 6 months of development, a huge investment, it turned out that this was a platform, this was an app that their customers didn't really need. And had they taken the time to really test and validate that hypothesis, those resources could have been assigned to other projects or other initiatives that ultimately probably would have drove more customer value.
So Dave, this reminds me of something I hear you talk about quite a bit, which is sort of shifting earlier or shifting left. If you think of like a typical process, you start at one point, you end at another point. Maybe most of our listeners are probably left to right readers. I don't know the language profile of all of our readers, but so moving from left to right, you think of like prototyping, designing, building, shipping, maintenance, and sort of rinse and repeat. So what does it mean to sort of move towards the left? We hear you and your team talking about sort of the cost of rework or preventing rework. The example you just gave would maybe be not even doing rework, but just not doing work, like the cost of building something your customers don't want. So how do you articulate and think about the value of eliminating that kind of rework?
Yeah, I think to your point, it can come in kind of a number of different forms. So if you look very early in the cycle, it can be optimizing those decisions on which products actually to build and avoiding those that customers don't need or customers don't want. When it gets more towards the right side of kind of the product development lifecycle, we look at optimizing the customer experience, optimizing the designs, and picking up on those friction points that are really going to irritate and potentially send customers away, that we want to be able to, identify through effective research, through effective customer interviews earlier, as opposed to customers picking those up on their own in a production environment or live, where it can really impact the business and impact that customer experience.
Dave, when you and your team do this, how do you quantify those things? So I'm imagining our listeners sitting there, hearing you talk about, how to get this feedback and how to think about quantifying it. I imagine most UX researchers like, yes, I discover things all the time that fix the shopping cart or fix the checkout or learn not to build this or to build this instead. How do you then go get the data to support building that into a model? What does that look like? And then again, if somebody was doing that internally, so imagine you're one of our listeners, how do you go do that? How do you quantify it?
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest challenges that kind of keeps me in business is how do we effectively measure the ROI of UX initiatives? And one of the big questions we often get when talking with customers is, well, what should we be measuring? And the truth is, if you're just starting or if the UX practice at your organization is somewhat immature, I would say you could almost measure anything. If you truly don't know where to start, an old trick from my consulting days is to think about what makes a good day for you. And for a lot of the teams that I speak with, that could be we were able to publish, research and insights, or we were able to speak with customers, or we were able to influence roadmaps and designs. That makes a great day for them. And I say, great, start there, measure some of those outcomes, measure some of those activities, and it will help build that muscle and ultimately gain momentum. I think from there, being able to align those activities and outcomes to business goals and really thinking about now a bit broader, the goals of the business and how these relate to the work that's being done. And again, one of the easiest ways to really get an understanding and do this is to go up a level and maybe speak to your boss and understand what makes a great day for them. How are they measured on performance? And work your way up, kind of bottoms up approach that way. Another approach to really understand the business levers is, again, another management consulting tool called the value driver tree. Really breaks down a business into the individual elements, and it's a bit more of an advanced approach, but you can kind of go at it two ways. And then finally, when you've got an idea now of what you're going to measure, how you're going to link that to business goals, establish baselines. So give yourself something to measure against and understand if things are improving or maybe not. And then decide on a regular measurement cadence and ultimately report those results out in a way that will hopefully speak to your audience. So in my experience, focusing on those results and impact is going to resonate more with an executive audience, maybe less so on the methodologies and details. Folks who are really interested, folks who want to learn more can always reach out and you've got that information available. But that's kind of best practice in terms of how we approach and look to link research and UX to really business impact and ROI.
That's a great answer. And I would just add to it something I've heard you talk about, Dave, which is just the difference between one-time ROI and recurring ROI as well, right? So when you talk about to senior leaders, it's really great if you can discover something that saves me something once, right? We learned that this was a problem, we fixed it, it drove, shopping cart conversion up, and you can measure that, right? But we think about changing a process. You can get repeatable ROI, and that's really important when you're building out your value management model to show that recurring investment. So, for example, reducing the headcount cost associated with building something because we're not building stuff we end up having to throw away or rework. What's great for an executive is that becomes a recurring saving, right? If I stop doing that research, now I'm going to start building stuff that maybe I'm going to have to do a bunch of rework or I'm going to have to build it a second time. And so I think that's another thing I've really learned from you and your team is to sort of think about how to create these buckets. One-time ROI can be great too. Like you can really, drive some upside for the business and really think about how to categorize those. And that's a really important framing, I feel like, for senior executives. So let me ask you, Dave, one more thing here. When it comes to trends that you see in UX research, you talk to, frankly, a lot of the leaders driving these teams. What should companies be preparing to do right now to leverage these trends and sort of drive, the kind of value that people see in the business from doing great UX research?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the things I'm seeing more and more is that companies now are often competing on experience. Customers are more informed than ever. They can easily compare your product against your competitors and read reviews basically from every corner of the globe. And so as a result, companies want to become more customer-centric, and they look at things like those customer reviews, like NPS, like customer satisfaction, and try and determine how they stack up. I think the challenge there is kind of twofold. One, like any KPI, these measures can provide you some directional information, but without a great deal of context. That is, they don't necessarily tell you the why. And then two, they're also lagging indicators. So you're only getting that review or that CSAT score after a customer's potentially had a negative experience. And so the challenge or the trend is, how do you get ahead of that and proactively build those experiences that will not only delight your customers, but also potentially improve your margins? And so to me, this is kind of the big trend we're seeing, not just in UX, but how successful companies are measuring and managing and optimizing, I guess, their customers' digital experience, in 2024 and beyond. But Andy, you're in this space every day. Would love to hear what you think, what you're seeing here.
I think you're spot on with the sort of focus on business value. I think a couple of years ago, people were willing to invest in research if they learned interesting things. And I think a lot of folks in our space learned a lot of really interesting things. Like, it was always really fun to meet with researchers. I always loved meeting with our customers and ask them, like, what do you see happening in the industry, in your space, in your app? And you would learn all these really interesting things. I think one of the big trends is, it's always fun to learn interesting things, but how do I, turn that into business value? How do I turn that into something that's going to give me competitive advantage? So I definitely think we're seeing a lot of teams be more deliberate about maybe what work they prioritize, which projects they take on, but also how they communicate back the value of what they're doing, right? You can't just give a great insight to a team that goes and builds something And then the fact that that insight came from research sort of gets lost along the way. Like we want to connect that research. One of the trends we've seen is people connecting it into things like their Jira system. And so for those of you that aren't Jira users, it's basically a ticketing system that's used by engineering teams to sort of prioritize their work. And so if we see in a set of Jira tickets some great learnings that came from our UX research team, we implement those things, customer satisfaction goes way up, or again, conversion goes up, or shopping cart abandonment goes down, or whatever those things are. People go, oh, look, that was really valuable. But we learned it from this research that we invested in. And so I think that's going to continue to be a really big trend. So for our listeners, if they're, listen to the podcast, which we always appreciate. So thank you to everybody who listens to the podcast. And they're thinking, this sounds important and I'm doing a little bit of it, but I want to do more. What are some quick ways, maybe it's my last question, that UX researchers and designers can get started, tomorrow with aligning their current research initiatives with business value?
Yeah, I think being curious, always a good start and pretty natural for researchers, I would say. Becoming a student and a researcher of the business they're in within that business is a really great place to start. And, a lot of my work is learning about our customers' businesses, their challenges, understanding what makes them tick, how they're organized. And it's rare that I get on a call with someone who isn't really interested in talking about their work and what they're doing to try to improve. And so there's no reason why folks can't take this kind of same approach and try to put themselves in the shoes of their leaders or other departments that they work with to try and understand the questions and the challenges they're faced with and how their work can potentially impact them. With that information in mind, kind of as I mentioned, think about how to measure some of the work you're doing, how to report that, and share the results. Don't become, the silent tree falling in the forest. Share those results within your organization to gain momentum and build influence and really become that strategic thought partner that's really going to be able to move the needle. I would say, especially, in these times of kind of protracted growth, everyone's struggling to do more with less. They can be very much head down and hyper-focused on the work in front of them. And so just encourage folks not to be afraid of getting in front of their colleagues and showing how they can help through this type of work.
Well, great ideas and great feedback. Dave, you and your team in the Value Management Office do an incredible job. As you said, you've worked with almost 350 customers now. By the time the episode airs, we'll probably be over 350. For those of you that are customers, you can always reach out to your user testing team. We're happy to get involved and sort of share how we do this. Or if you're just in the industry, you can always reach out to me, reach out to Dave. We're always happy to help. We're passionate about UX research and design and helping anybody, whether you're a user testing customer or not, sort of demonstrate that value is really important to us. So Dave, thanks for spending some time with us today and sharing a lot about how to connect UX research and design to business value.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andy. Really, really appreciate the time.